I like Oregon's schedule a lot, Max. I think having Ohio State at home and Michigan on the road is the easier split. I think if those were flipped, Oregon's win total on FanDuel would be 9.5 instead of 10.5. But you get those games like that. Washington is at home. You're going to be a big favorite in every non-conference game. I mean, last year they blasted Oregon State 31-7, and yeah, it's on the road this year. Oregon actually hasn't won since 2018, but that Oregon State team is not going to be as good as they were a year ago. They're going to be capable, but they're probably, an 8 or 9 win Mountain West team, and Oregon should be able to take care of business there. I keep looking at the schedule and thinking that, look, 9-3 might be a worst case scenario for this schedule. I think there's a 90+% chance that Oregon is winning at least 10 games this year with how everything shakes out. Because, Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, Washington, yeah, they all have my attention at some level. I think Oregon's winning at least 3 of those.
Yeah, I liked your point about Ohio State coming to Eugene and Oregon having to go out to Ann Arbor and how that is maybe the more favorable, especially with a coaching change in Ann Arbor. I'm still kind of interested. I'm not really sure how I feel about Michigan just yet because of how much they lost and just because they have a new coach and a new quarterback. Like that's another big part of it. So I do like your point there. And then I think a couple other games to keep an eye on. Obviously, you have the game against Wisconsin out in Madison. I don't know if I'm saying this just because I'm hearing one of my best buddies in the back of my head. I'm kind of keeping an eye out for that Purdue game just because you have to go out to West Lafayette. It's freaking cold. That's the week after Ohio State. Win or lose, that's going to be an emotionally taxing game. But that said, I think that Dan Lanning has definitely proven to be a little bit better than his predecessor at making sure his team gets up for every game and doesn't play down to their opponent. I'm looking at you, Cal 2021. Yeah, I think 10 wins is
I love that reference.
Is definitely realistic. And I feel like the floor kind of feels like 9 wins.
Yeah. First of all, the Cal 2021 reference is so on par because I agree that the Cristobal administration had a lot of good things about it. You can't look at, his time in Eugene and say that it was just a complete and utter mess. It was not. The most, I think, frustrating element was playing up and down to the level of their competition. I think Lanning has done an excellent job in just 2 years as a head coach of making sure his team plays to their standard every week. You think about, I think the biggest early win he had was 2022 against BYU. You had the Georgia debacle and then Eastern Washington. You didn't really know what to make of it. And then BYU came in ranked 25th and Oregon kind of housed them at Autzen. Or you think about, the UCLA game that year, which was College Game Day. And the Bruins were unbeaten at the time and Oregon won the game by 15 points. And I think of like Cal this past season. That Cal team last year was significantly better than the Cal team in 2021. Played at the same stadium. Oregon won last year. What was it, 62-21? So like something in that sort of range. 63. Like it was some big, blowout once they got past the fumble. And in 2021,
63-19.
Yeah, 63-19. You had in 2021 a 1-5 Cal team that admittedly played better football down the stretch. They were 1-5 that came to Autzen, and Oregon needed a 4th down goal line stand to win the game at home. And I think whatever discussion you want to have about Dan Lanning as a head coach, and I think Josh Pate has made a couple really good points in the last week talking about him on his show about the narrative about Dan Lanning is, he doesn't win enough big games. He doesn't have a conference. He doesn't do that. And he's like, he's been a head coach for 2 seasons. Two seasons. Like he had a hilarious line. I was telling my dad about it earlier that where he said, well, people say Dan Lanning always does this. Dan Lanning doesn't always park in the same spot. Like he just doesn't, he hasn't established himself. And you look at the other coaches that have won national championships, that have won multiple national championships, it can take over 5 years to get to that sort of level. You play at a high level in the years preceding it, but Kirby didn't win. He got to a national championship 2018. He took over 2015 or 16. And you look at Jim Harbaugh, for instance, didn't play for a national championship until this past year. He took over 2015 or 2016. Like they took over around the same time. Like you're on the other side of the halfway point to a decade before these guys had their programs playing at that sort of level. And, I think Lanning has set the expectations really high. He certainly does with the way that he recruits, the way Oregon brings in transfer portal players, their roster retention. Like, there's a lot of hype around the season. But I just look at the schedule and, yeah, I feel like they're going to be favored in every game except Ohio State, where they're just a mild underdog. They probably won't be a big favorite going to the Big House to play Michigan, but I think the schedule works out really well, and I think 10 wins is kind of the baseline standard for success.
I definitely agree with you on the 10 wins being well within reach for Oregon. The last point I wanted to just add on the 2021 Cal thing, when you look back at that season, Spencer, it might make negative
No
sense.
sense.
It makes negative sense.
It does.
That Oregon was able to go into Columbus with Anthony Brown as the quarterback, beat the Buckeyes at home, and then they, come back to Eugene and narrowly escape Cal at
They
home.
lost to a 3-9 Stanford team in the same year they beat Ohio State on the road. That's college football at its finest. But what is that?
That was a crazy game. That Stanford game was a battle. And I remember, I'm always going to remember this, Spencer. That was one of my favorite seasons to cover because I was like kind of traveling with the team. I wasn't on the plane, but I was, following them and whatnot. But I was in Palo Alto for that game because I'm from the Bay Area. So I got to go home, see my mom and everything. And that press box is like, you're like shoulder to shoulder with everybody. So when they were like, oh yeah, whoever wants to go down on the field, go for it. Like nobody else, I'm telling you, Spencer, no one else wanted to go. And I'm like, oh man, get me down there. And I'm like, just in case some craziness happens. And then what do you know? That game ended the way that it did. But just to kind of put a bow on this, talking about the Lanning stuff with Pate. He hasn't been there very long. So it's like, if you're looking at what he's been able to accomplish, the only team he's really lost to is Washington, if you can look at it, from year to year. And that's obviously huge because that's one of Oregon's biggest rivals. But look at what Washington has done. They went to the national championship. They lost their coach, but where did he go? He took over for Nick Saban at Alabama, one of the most prestigious programs of all time. And if that's the only guy you're losing to, it's tough because the margin for error is slim.
Yeah, I agree. And sorry to cut you off, but I just thought of a baseball analogy that you'll be able to appreciate. You're a San Francisco Giants fan. If you're pitching against the Dodgers and you go 7 innings and you give up 3 runs, but the only runs you gave up, the only hits you gave up were Shohei Ohtani homers, do you look at that guy and go, oh man, he's just an okay pitcher. Like he had just an average day. Or did he pitch really well and then Shohei Ohtani got you? Like Kalen DeBoer was just really good. And DeBoer is just much more experienced and Lanning is not. And I think he's going to continue to get better as a head coach because I've seen that so far in the 2 seasons he's been with Oregon. I have no reason to expect it's not going to continue to improve.
Yeah, I think the last thing I was going to say is like the margin for error is so small. So it's like you lose to Washington and it's like, well, I don't know if any fans saying it's a failure of a season necessarily. I mean, that's really doomsday thinking. But the reality of it is you could say that, he had a Washington problem, but now Kalen DeBoer isn't there. So you would think Jed Fish is a good coach, man, but you would think it's going to get easier, especially with the way that roster was depleted, to kind of get over that Washington hump moving forward in 2024 and beyond. But also, when you look at those losses, it doesn't matter what team it's to. You didn't get it done when you needed to, and I'm sure that Dan Lanning would tell anybody that, where he asked in a press conference, you got to win those big games. So I think that that's the game that everyone wants to hone in on because they lost 2 of them last year, and they haven't beaten Washington since he's been the head coach. But I think that they're doing all the right things to change that, and you got to give Washington their credit where it's due. And a lot of Duck fans don't like doing that, but you got to do that and line it up again in 24.
Yeah, I also, going back to a point you made earlier, that Purdue game, second year for Ryan Walters as the head coach, respectable quarterback, like crazy stuff just happens against Purdue. But what you pointed out, which is whether you win or lose against Ohio State, it's going to be emotionally charged in one way or the other, and it'll feel different. It'll feel incredibly different, and it's on the road. It's going to be a Friday night game as well. So yeah, I mean, crazier things have happened before, but I still look at Oregon's schedule and I feel really good. So does Max Torres. We appreciate you coming by. As always, my man, good to talk to you.